Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Thank you for joining us. It is the Political Deep Dive. I am Dave Valente. Thank you for joining us this week. We have a special guest this week, Mike ter Maat, who is running for president for the Libertarian Party. But before we bring him on, let's bring on Dan the Man Fishman.
What's up, peoples?
What's going on?
Not much. I am wondering about the Panthers' complete collapse. I am worried about dams blowing up in Ukraine, and I don't know. There's a lot of crazy shit. And then I heard something about Trump indictments, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure what that is.
Just a little bit. I heard rumors.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a weird week. I-95 collapsed due to a tanker exploding.
So that's a terrible thing because anybody who's driven the Northeast Corridor knows.
Oh, it's awful. Yeah.
So first of all, normally if you're driving the Northeast Corridor and you don't go to Philadelphia, you don't go down 95. You take the Jersey Turnpike in between Baltimore and New York City, or DC and New York City, etc. You go around it. But if you're in the mood for a cheesesteak on the way, it's only a 30-minute detour to get into Philadelphia. And both Pat's and Gino's, which I know Philadelphians don't get mad, but they're not great cheesesteaks. But they're the cheesesteaks most people think of. Those are only about 8 to 10 minutes off of I-95. So that's how this is a huge tragedy, right? How it affects me, Dan Fishman.
Getting the cheesesteak?
Exactly.
I don't disagree with that. I been to Philadelphia once. I did the Pats and Geno's thing because I was just a tourist, and I know that there are other places that are much better. But for me, I will say Pats was better for me. I'm down with the whiz and the onions, so Wit Whiz. It's so this happened a few years ago in Atlanta. Well, it's probably about 10 years ago at least in Atlanta, where a tanker blew up on, I want to say the connector, which is 85 and 75 in the middle of Atlanta, took out a bridge. It, burned the bridge so much that it actually burnt through the concrete. The Army Corps of Engineers got that up really, really quickly. So the replacement of that really quickly. I mean, almost concerningly quickly, because you're like, I remember when this road was built and it took like 30 years. But the Army Corps of Engineers does it, and there's like 3 days.
Yeah, no, there is. There's a couple of interesting things about it. First is that indeed it can be done relatively quickly, and it probably should be. There's all sorts of scenarios like this. On the other hand, though, there is a dilemma in terms of who's going to come in and actually make it happen, right? Because if it's the city of Philadelphia, I mean, it should be the federal government because it's the interstate, right?
Yeah.
But there's going to be jurisdiction fights. There's probably going to be labor union fights, stuff like that. I think that we are going to find that government is going to really foul this up. It's the sort of thing that if it were just a question of getting it done right away, we could. And there have been a couple, people can look up online. They can see China and the Netherlands both dealing with a problem like this and solving the problem in under 48 hours. And there's time-lapse photography of it happening.
Yeah.
It can totally be done. And we're better than those guys.
But we should be, yes.
Yeah, we should be. But the thing that we have that they don't have to deal with is bureaucracy out the wazoo.
So, yeah, I'm thinking that the difference between what happened in Georgia and what happened in what happened here is that Georgia is definitely a right to work state, and the union work on projects like that is not a mandatory thing. So I'm not really sure what the Philadelphia situation is, but I think that there's probably more union requirements there. So we'll see. It can be done very quickly.
I hope that we are back on the air next week saying, wow, well, we were wrong. Pennsylvania and Philadelphia just knocked that out of the park. One of the most amazing features we've ever seen done. However, I have faith that we're going to get on here and say, you know what? Absolutely no progress has been done. And in fact, they've somehow made it worse in the last week. They collapsed to the other side of the bridge.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's bring on our guest. Mike ter Maat is running for the presidential nomination of the Libertarian Party in 2024. So, Mike, welcome aboard. How you doing, sir?
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you, gentlemen. Thanks very much for having me on. Thanks for the discussion of the 95 thing. You're right. I hope it isn't made worse in the next
It could be. It could be.
nightmare. And I won't pretend to understand the details about this, but I understand that the initial crash took place beneath it, which I believe implies it'll be a different jurisdiction than 95 itself, right?
Yep. Yeah, well, the people are talking about that already. There was a oil tanker or gas tanker underneath that was in an accident and caught on fire and then burned the underpass. But you're right; it was on Philadelphia streets, and that's why I'm saying there's going to be a jurisdiction issue and all that stuff. I think it's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, that's going to be awful.
Potentially, hopefully, as you pointed out, the federal government will take it upon themselves to fix it, at least temporarily, quickly, and then fight over the expense of a permanent fix later on.
Well, anybody who has plans either coming northeast down to the south or south heading up northeast way is definitely going to be impacted by this. I mean, there are ways to
take the Jersey Turnpike. Don't go through Philly.
Yeah. Or I will say, do not head up 81. Stay away from my neck of the woods because we already got enough track.
No, I gotcha. 95 is my path north as well. Yeah, I'm in Virginia. Those of us that got to make it to Porkfest, right? Got to make it to New Hampshire. Got to use 95.
Yeah.
Well, let me give you a recommendation. Having done this drive a lot of times, especially if you're going to Porkfest, put your GPS on Scranton, go to Scranton first, and then cut east from there. You'll come east across the Mass Pike, but you will avoid all of the 95 corridor, and that's a disaster.
I got you. Okay, that sounds like good advice. And Dan, you're in Maryland now?
I am. For people who know the DMV, I am in Maryland, but I am directly across the river from Mount Vernon. If you were to could throw an aerobie, those super far distance things, or if you were George Washington, you could skip a silver dollar across the Potomac. You would hit my house going across.
The Potomac is only like a mile wide there, right, or even less.
We are actually the spot. Yeah, it's not. I don't know exactly how far it is, but we are actually at the spot where it is still brackish enough that Maryland would give me money to have oysters in the water. But I'm not doing that.
I get it. I'm about an hour by car, not by boat. Probably 3 hours by boat, 1 hour by car, farther down the river from you. Where I am, the river is about 4 miles across.
So you're near what is it? Port Royal, Fort Gorge?
I'm on the Virginia side. I'm in Westmoreland County.
Got you, because there is a bridge on the southern end of Maryland that goes across the Potomac there, and I'm trying to remember
the Harry Nice Bridge.
Yeah,
and I'm a good hour east of there.
Gotcha.
So I'm pretty far from there. Yeah, we do pull crabs out of the water here, and the commercial guys pull oysters out here. The oyster packer that's about a half mile from my house, I'm told, is one of the 1 or 2 or 3 largest packers left in the United States. They're pretty busy, so good for them.
Yeah. Aquaculture is one of the I hope, fingers crossed, one of the areas that government hasn't gotten too crazy in regulations, and small entrepreneurs, small aqua farmers are still able to make a decent living for themselves.
So
yeah, I understand the regulations have made it trickier over the last decade. I'm no expert at this, but I do hear their complaints.
Dan, you're either doing the greatest ventriloquist act ever, or you're.
Oh, my screen froze. Let me see if I can fix that.
Let it go.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Well, it still looks like you and sounds like you, so that's okay.
I'm so happy that
it could be worse.
Exactly. All right, now how do I look?
Hang
on. All right, deactivate, activate.
So, Mike, while he's doing that, you're kind of there, Dan.
I'm fading into
the.
All right, it's the reverse transporter effect.
There you go. So, tell us about how your, I guess, your journey into the Libertarian Party, or journey with Liberty, and how you got into that.
What the heck is going on here?
Yeah, sure.
I got into the Libertarian Party about 12 or 13 years ago or so. I grew up a banker and a conservative Republican for some years in the 80s and the 90s, and went to grad school to become an economist, and worked in Washington, worked for the federal government for a while. I worked for the White House for a couple of years. I worked in the financial services industry. I advocated in Washington for quite a few years, pro-market stuff, trying to lower regulatory burdens to promote competition in the financial services industry, specifically in banking. And a buddy of mine and I opened our own business. We were providing consulting services in the financial services space and educational programming for bankers. And in 2010, around the time that I became a registered libertarian, I pursued my second career as a police officer, as odd as that may seem, and worked for a cop in Broward County for 11 and a half years until about 18 months ago. And then moved from Florida to Virginia.
Awesome. What are you doing in Virginia? Are you doing this full time?
Doing this full time.
Okay.
Retired from the police department. Yeah.
Awesome. So, what drew you to the Libertarian Party?
I had, as I said, I had grown up as a banker and an economist. So I came to this sort of from what I would characterize as the right-hand side, which is to say, trying to make the market work better, trying to make the economy work better, believing that the object of the game, of course, was for markets to help the economy work more efficiently. And that was the big goal. I did think in those days, in the 80s and even into the 90s a little bit, that the Republican Party could make some contribution toward making policy more fiscally conservative. I was wrong about that, of course. That was proven in fairly short order. And it wasn't really until some years later that I came to libertarianism as well from what I would call the left-hand side, which I would characterize as sort of the ethical side, the philosophical side, the side that would say, even if efficiency weren't enhanced by allowing people to make decisions for themselves, it's still the right thing to do, right? I would credit Austrian economists for merging these two concepts. But certainly, even if I can make a weird statement, even if socialism were to work, right? Even if socialism worked, the government still wouldn't have the ethical authority, wouldn't have the right to make decisions for us. That it's up to us to make our own decisions for our lives.
You know, it's interesting. There's a statement that I like to throw out every now and then. I say, we all actually grew up in a communist family because right, the Marxian ideal is from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And I was privileged enough to grow up in a family where my father and my mother took care of us as children. And, you know, I always say, if you're lucky enough, now that's from each according to their ability, because my parents had the ability to take care of us, to each according to their needs. They took care of us as children.
Sure. It's much more the way families work, right?
Exactly. And I say, if you're very, very lucky, as a child, you will be able to return that to your parents and someday take care of them.
Right.
But it's an interesting thing because when we talk about communism, when we talk about socialism, on a very small scale, like when you talk about what your family is, that is what you want. You want to be able to take care of each other. But
absolutely, those intimate relationships among people that we know well, our immediate family, and sometimes even our extended family. In some cultures, extended further out to a larger clan. Socialism, we don't call it that, right?
Right.
But as you put it, to each according to his needs, and from each according to his ability is the way that we run families.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it like a paleo.
Typically, not always.
Paleo socialism, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I do agree. I mean, you're lucky if you've got a family like that. And I think I don't want to poo-poo people whose families didn't run like that. But when it does, it's not a bad thing to say there are times and places and there are people that we choose to care for. I think Larry Sharp has a great phrase about it where he says, you know what? If you're a Republican, be as Republican as you want. If you're a Democrat, be as Democrat as you want. If you're a socialist, be as socialist as you want. Just don't make anybody else live by your rules.
That's right. No, I think we all agree on that. And you're right. Larry does say that, and he says it very well. He says it about conservatism and liberalism as well. And of course, that's what makes it tricky for us. We're all about decentralization, right? Because we want those authorities for building those relationships to be pushed down at the most granular level possible, which of course is why when it's pushed up to the federal level, it bothers us most. And when it's pushed all the way down to the family level, it bothers us least. And that's where I think those types of decisions belong.
So I want to go back to something you'd said earlier. You talked about serving in law enforcement. I'm interested in how your time in law enforcement brought you to libertarianism.
Sure. And recognizing that I was already a member of the Libertarian Party by then, but how it fits with libertarianism. Yeah, absolutely. I think that most police officers, well, first of all, most police officers wouldn't say they would agree with what I'm about to say, but I think most police officers certainly have a libertarian streak. Most of them, I think, are anecdotally, I don't have data on this. I think anecdotally, I would say most police officers are registered Republicans, but most have a libertarian streak. The way I explain that is to suggest, think about how it is that most of us like to occasionally get mad at our boss, right? I mean, who doesn't get frustrated with their employer or with their boss from time to time? Well, if you're a police officer, that takes the form of, oh, you can't believe the stupid thing the city or the state wants us to enforce this week, right? What the legislature changed, this year, and the dumb ideas that came out of City Hall or from the county commission or what have you. And that's a very real thing. One of the things that surprised me, Dan, about becoming a police officer was the enormous amount of latitude that police officers have on any particular case, right? Yep. It is a team sport. You're not out there by yourself, but you are typically there without supervision. And that means that whoever case it is, whoever is assigned to being the lead officer for that particular case, has quite a bit of discretion about how that particular case is going to play out. Right. And so you realize fairly quickly, particularly if you're a libertarian, but whether you're a libertarian or not, it occurs to you fairly quickly that you are the last bulwark against government overreach. You know, you figure out fairly quickly that that you can stand up for someone's individual liberties, including against the state, including against the government, including against your own enforcement. Right. And sometimes that's incredibly necessary, not only for you to hold back in terms of showing discretion in your own actions, but going out of your way from time to time to say the law needs to look the other way once in a while. We don't have to prosecute every case. We don't have to take people to jail in every instance possible. I was lucky in the sense that I didn't get wrapped up in the war on drugs. We had a separate drug unit, for example. But as you might imagine, there are some tricky and interesting and sometimes contentious conversations with fellow officers if you're libertarian minded, not just with a capital L, but with a lowercase L.
You know, one of the great examples of that is, and I can't remember the name of the organization, LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, the guys who want to legalize cannabis. And when we legalized it in Massachusetts,
a great group of guys.
Great group of guys. When we legalized it in Massachusetts, they gave us an idea for a commercial that we ran on television where we said, interviewed a police officer, Boston police officer. He said, what's the most dangerous call for an officer to get? It's like, domestic dispute, far and away, because
that's what everyone typically puts their finger on because there's so many unknown, quickly moving parts.
Yeah. And so then we asked a bunch of officers. We said, which would you rather go to, a domestic dispute with alcohol involved, or a domestic dispute with cannabis involved? And
that's an easy call.
Yeah, exactly. They all said, I don't think I've ever been to a domestic dispute with cannabis involved. And that had a lot to do with us getting it legalized. So I'm on the same page as you. A lot of times I tell people, if you say back the blue, the biggest way that you can back the blue is to make them not enforce stupid laws, because that's the thing that puts police officers in the harm's way the most.
Well, you're right. And certainly it's what wastes police officers' time the most. It's also what undermines our relationship with our communities. And of course, and I'm not suggesting you need this lecture, the war on drugs does our communities no good. It is indeed what creates black markets, which are so dangerous, and what does lead to an enormous amount of violence that's dangerous for police officers and most especially for everybody else. So all of that has to go, of course. And of course, it's the war on drugs that so often inhibits people from reaching out for the help that they need when they're facing addiction problems themselves. So,
Well,
yeah,
you
you
know,
know,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say, so we're in an interesting area of legislation and laws right now where we have a lot of states passing anti-LGBT laws. And that's an interesting thing. I wonder if you have a take on that at all.
I do, which is not to say that I have the definitive answer on how to solve all these problems, right? Don't let me accidentally suggest that. But in answer to your question, of course, I mean, I think we've all thought of it, right? First of all, having spent 20 years in Florida, let's start there, right? Which is where so many of these debates play out recently with Governor DeSantis. Who's and by the way, I should also hasten to add, not everything that DeSantis does is completely wrong. I'm going to sound pretty negative here for a couple of minutes, and I don't mean to pile
Well,
on.
I just want to say, I don't know if you've heard, but in the dispute with Disney, Disney is now releasing a animated movie with a character who is transitioning to female, and her name is Rhonda Santis.
I find that hard to believe, but it's funny as hell.
I made that up, but
all right, we'll send it in. Maybe
Disney princess ever.
It might be worth 2 free passes, if nothing. At least you'll give some executive's assistant a good chuckle.
Exactly.
Look, one of the things that's got to bother you about Ron DeSantis' attitude toward this, and acknowledging that it's all political, so on some level it's not to be taken completely seriously, but there is actual legislation involved that actually affects real school boards and therefore actually affects real families. One of the things that's got to bother you is the idea that he believes that he should be making these decisions at the state level. However you feel about the legislation itself, however you feel about what his intentions are, it's got to bother you that he's effectively taking away the authority of local families to make these decisions for themselves. You got to believe that the system works better. And we can talk about how crappy and messed up our public school system is as well, but let's leave that aside just for a moment. To the extent to which our school boards can work as well as they can, they have to be aligned with the underlying values of their communities. They have to be under the control as much as possible, I believe, of the parents. And I don't mean to say, look, I don't mean to say all teachers are idiots. That's not where I'm going, right? I'm not trying to say administrators don't have any value, don't have any input. But families, parents have to be able to exert as much influence as possible. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big believer in school choice. So they have a choice about which school they go to align best with their family values. But until and unless we get a perfect school choice system in place, and thankfully we're moving in the right direction in so many states now, but until and unless we get that perfectly ironed out, which I believe is going to take another generation or two in the United States, we have to at least give parents as much influence as possible over school boards. Now, as far as, the legislation itself, if you want to go there, I don't have a problem per se with a rule that says something like, I don't believe sexuality ought to be discussed in school. I believe that that's what ought to be left up to the parents. And I don't mean to suggest that it's a straight gay thing, trans, non-trans thing. If you're truly, and I'm not going to try to project into someone's heart and figure out, what their motivations are. Let's try to, as libertarians, set that aside just for a moment. And yeah, that's probably worth a debate, but let's set that aside just for a moment. I'm okay with the rule that says don't, let's stick to arithmetic and reading for primary and secondary education. If families want to discuss it in whatever way they want, I think that should be left up to them. I think it's one of the reasons why so many people are warming to the idea of school choice, statistically speaking, more than ever before. in such relatively large numbers is because they want some of those conversations to be had at home. And of course, the entire COVID management situation, I think, is driving that a lot as well. But in the communities that I'm most intimately involved with, I hear a lot of, I just don't want my kids wrapped up in these conversations at school. And it's not necessarily because, the material itself, I'm afraid teachers are going to say the wrong thing. I just don't want it discussed because now I got to worry about what the teachers are going to say.
Well, I mean,
Whereas
I think when for the longest time, and I'm going back to even when I was in school, when that subject came up, that it was communicated to the parents that this is a subject we're going to be discussing, and parents were given the options of, this is an inner city Albuquerque, New Mexico school that, if you don't want this discussed with your child, then we can put them into another classroom for those periods that we discuss this. I mean, the thing that worries me about not discussing this, especially as children get older, is, and a lot of people have couched this in the idea that it's grooming, but how do they know it's grooming if they don't discuss this at all? Like, you wouldn't know that your neighbor is grooming you if you're not allowed to discuss any of this information at all. You wouldn't know that your teacher is grooming you if another teacher is grooming you for sexual predation, because you're kept in the dark and you're kept ignorant of the signs and things like that. I think that's where I kind of have problems with the, let's not discuss sexuality or anything like that, especially as they get older within the school system.
Yeah, or you're in the Dugar family.
Jeez.
Well, yeah, I mean, good point. And we all have concerns about what individuals' families might be saying to kids as well, but that's a whole nother ball of wax, right? Just because we might agree or disagree with what certain families are teaching their kids as a matter of public policy, that's just, not under our purview. And yeah, Dave, I hear what you're saying about concerns about what's going on at school. If you don't have any, if the conversation is completely shut down, you might not know what's going on, right? I think it makes you more agree with that concern, but I'm not sure that our concern, which I share with you, is necessarily mollified by the idea that you would approve further discussion. Maybe. I mean, I see where you're going with that. But there is a pretty granular level
conflict, I think, between what the parents can vote on in a majority, though, as well as other people's individual rights. And so let's talk a little Brown versus Board of Education. Do you think that was correctly decided?
That's a really interesting case. Remember, the context is hard to relate to today, right?
Well,
it is hard.
I don't know. I can see Tennessee, I can see Florida saying we're not going to allow trans children to come to school anymore. We're not going to allow children who are transitioning to come to high school. Would we think that was legal? If it passes in, I don't know, what's the big super conservative community in Florida? I can't think of its name right now, but I could easily see them saying, you know what, we're not going to allow transitioning kids to come to school anymore.
What, the Villages?
Not the Villages. There's no kids there. It's all adults.
Yeah, I was thinking that was an old age.
It is a conservative place, though.
Yeah.
Well, I hear your concern, and I hope it doesn't come to that. And I can't imagine. Well, look, to your point, you and I can probably imagine lots of horrible things. Let's hope it remains virtually unimaginable that something like that would happen. And let's hope that before we get there, I realize this is a race against time. Let's hope that before we get to a point like that, we have a very, very robust school choice program in place, so that to the extent to which one school or even one system comes up with some really moronic policy, that it's only one among many choices that parents have.
Yeah. There is a...
That's not much of a good answer. I mean, you're still right? Well, I mean, that would be a bad thing.
It's a tough thing. So many years ago, Chris Rock was sent as a correspondent to the RNC, Republican National Convention, and he went around and he asked people a bunch of questions, stuff like that. But the most telling question was, he went up to people and he said, complete the following phrase, say it loud. And some people would say it clear, or they'd say, they try different phrases. However, every black person they asked completed it with, I'm black and I'm proud, because this big James Brown song.
Right.
And one of the things that he talked about, because Chris did a little political commentary afterwards, is the importance of visibility, because visibility for African Americans and what was Black pride for a long time changed the perceptions of most Americans who, I was very fortunate to spend my summers in Massachusetts, where outside of the cities, nobody had seen a black person. They're just, Massachusetts was an incredibly undiverse city outside of things. In fact, Massachusetts, people want to look it up.
Plenty of places in Massachusetts are very, very segregated.
Yeah, people want to look it up. There's a Pulitzer Prize winning photo called The Staining of Old Glory, with a white person trying to stab a black person to death with the American flag over the busing fights of segregation. But that
a horrific
chapter. And, we're certainly
and not just in Boston. I mean, arguably as bad as any place in Boston, but it was all over the United States.
Now, the interesting thing about it is that I do believe that visibility is what changed that people got to understand that, people of color are just people, and we didn't have that understanding. And so there's an interesting thing. Now, I agree with you. I would like to see public schools, certainly state-funded schools, go away. Probably not going to happen in the next 20 years, but
it's a phase out.
But maybe in the next 50 years.
And people like you and I would be more tolerant of public schools if they were only one of a bunch of options.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so it's an interesting thing. I actually, again, I was very privileged to go to a boarding school for high school, but my parents insisted that I go to the local public high school for my freshman year so that I would have that experience. And
you would know the
exactly.
difference.
And it was a great experience. But there is an interesting, and I think, I don't have any kids, but if I had kids and I had an option of having them spend time in a public school, I would still choose that, because there is sort of this idea that we are, part of the human experience is that to some extent we belong to each other. I don't believe in authoritarian that we get to tell each other what to do, but
where are you with Joe Biden says they're not just your kids?
Yeah, exactly. That's the real problem with it, is that they are my kids, but my kids have to live with your kids. And that's an important thing about it, is that
it's our community, but it's my family.
Right, exactly. And we all have to find a way to live together. I mean, I often say that, in today's modern world, and I am, we talked about law enforcement officers and some of the things that they're not allowed to say. I know so many law enforcement officers who, when they talk about your right to own a gun, they say, one of the most reasons you should own a gun is because we're always just minutes away. But if seconds count,
not seconds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
no, it's true.
Yeah.
We always were, we would pride ourselves in the community of 30,000 people in which I worked. I could typically get anywhere in 90 seconds, which sounds at first blush pretty great until you remember I'm not getting dispatched until after 90 seconds. Right. So I'm there in 3 minutes. 3 minutes is a hell of a long time if you need a gun to bail you out, for me to get one there.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally true.
Yeah.
All right. So, Mike, you alluded earlier, we'd had a conversation, I think, almost a year ago. We were both at Liberty Speaks. And
yeah, I brought it up earlier. I was saying that you were very nice to me because I made a mistake with a number in Maryland. I don't remember what it was, but I remember that you helped straighten it out.
Well, luckily, Irene has the tape up, and so I'm going to play it, and then we can talk about it a little bit. Let's see. Yeah, it's this one. You guys tell me if the sound doesn't come through.
If
That looks
you're
right.
on a bus going from town to town in the year 2020, you're not actually running for president. I'm a big Joe fan. I think she's terrific. I think she's a libertarian. I think she's smart. But if you're on a bus going from town to town, you may be doing something terrific. You may be doing something wonderful. But you're not actually, in a modern sense, running for president.
And this clip is only a minute.
A lot of people don't realize. Do you know how much
Okay.
money the campaign raised last time? $8 million. I just read the
Yeah,
FEC
it was only like
report
3.5, right? That was the number I got
Yep.
wrong.
And I went through it line by line. Where did all the money go? Even if it were
Well,
only
that
$3
part's
million, it
actually
wasn't.
true. I just
According to the
looked at the
FEC.
wrong account.
So that's my bit. So it's interesting. So you say you looked at the wrong account. You mean not Joe,
Well, I made
not Joe Jorgensen's
not
account?
sure I made type A mistake or type B mistake. We did go through the numbers. I believe that I probably got the two different campaigns mixed up when I cited the $8 million figure as opposed to the. I shouldn't be trying to quote a number.
Right.
I think Joe's campaign was in the 3 million range. Is that
This
right?
it, 3.4 million. Now, I
Mhm.
think that they
3.5.
probably added, since we had that conversation, another $100,000 just because the nature of the
Right,
way-
but 3.5 ish. Yep.
Yeah. Now, but so if you can explain to me, because the thing about it is, like, if when I said $8 million, you said $8 million, and I said $3 million. I didn't know the exact number, but I had been pretty intimately involved in the campaign. But
Yeah.
then you sort of doubled down on. You said I went through it line by line.
Yeah, I think that I must have been referring to the previous cycle. I mean, I made a mistake about which campaign I was talking about.
The previous Jorgensen cycle.
No, the previous presidential cycle.
You mean
we had gone through the previous like 2 or 3 cycles with Gary
you were
Johnson
referring
and Joe
the
Jorgensen.
Johnson Weld campaign? Gotcha. They were $12 million. But so, one of the things that you said later on in that, and I can play the tape if you want.
I trust
Okay.
you. I made a mistake.
You said, yeah, and you said, if you have $300,000 in the bank at the end of the day, that's a mistake. You're not running your campaign well.
Metaphorically, yeah, I believe that's true. I think you got to spend it as hard and quickly and bold, loud advertising as possible. I think you got to get out ahead of it if you're a libertarian candidate.
So my thought about that, and I want to come back to this because I don't know how much in other places you've been sort of criticizing the Jorgensen campaign, but they didn't have all $3.5 million on day one.
No, you're exactly right. In fairness, it was raised over several months' time.
Yep.
Agreed.
And they had payroll. One of the things
Of course. My point was that the money could have been better spent rather than being on a bus. I would have gone with advertising online, possibly some on national television, which sometimes isn't usually the most efficient way. But I would have gone with online advertising rather than getting on a bus.
Right. So, it's interesting. Let me just sort this real quick. So in their disbursements, because I know you went through this line by line, the top 3 things, the top 4 disbursements actually are big media buys. One of the things they did that I thought was particularly clever was they ran ads on Roku and Hulu so that they were able to get national campaigns, but targeting specific television shows and demographics. And because it's Roku and Hulu, exactly who actually watched your ad. So you're then able to send them a follow-up email. Hey, I know you saw the Joe Jorgensen ad, stuff like that.
Right.
I don't think that's foolishly wasting your money.
I don't think so either. I think that's a good idea. I think more of that should have been done earlier, but I agree wholeheartedly with you. That's exactly the kind of thing that should be done.
And then, the one last thing I'll say is that, the bus, the whole purpose of the bus was to show up in towns where there were local libertarians running for office. And when Joe Jorgensen shows up on a bus, the local media comes out. And now they run a story about Joe Jorgensen and all the local libertarians who are running for office. And this is during COVID. So, Joe was in 10 times as many states as Joe Biden or Donald Trump, because they both went to 5, and that's not quite right because she didn't get to 50. She got to 48. But Joe was actually out there campaigning, or the campaign, you know what? Spike did some of those as well, and they split their time up so that each one of them was on the bus.
Right. There's no question that she worked at this very hard, and I don't think that anyone, let me say that I certainly wouldn't criticize her and or Spike on the basis of not working hard. I think that clearly that was done. I think when you're physically going from town to town, it's a very expensive way to get into those media markets. There's only a certain number of markets you can get to when you're literally driving from town to town. That's not to say that it's not a good thing to do. I mean, that you're not adding value. You are adding value. I just don't think it's the most efficient way to go about that, right? The whole object of the game is to tap into as many national markets as possible, and that requires money too.
So, well, that's an interesting thing. So let's talk about, what would you say is the most successful media campaign you've been involved with?
Well, I've been involved with a number of campaigns that we would consider not very successful, but on a fairly large scale. I was involved with media campaigns that we ran when I was with the American Bankers Association. There was a media campaign that I was, on the periphery, merely as an advisor. I wasn't in charge of the buy, right? For Bush Quail 92, for example. And I was an outside observer working as a volunteer inside the campaign, but I was not a decision maker for the subsequent, the 96 Republican campaign. So I had a good view of those, enough to understand what the parameters were, what the objectives were. And I'm not suggesting that we should hold those up as examples where everything went right. Right.
Well,
because it didn't.
Well, and I think too, one of the key things about it, one of my favorite libertarian books is Hayek's The Fatal Conceit, in which he talks about the fact that there is no success without 99 simultaneous failures, because those failures inform the successes. And so, have we failed enough as libertarian campaigns to succeed in 2024? I don't know about that, but the other thing,
I believe we have a better shot in 2024, thanks to the hard work that has gone into past campaigns, notwithstanding, our joint frustration and not being as successful as we wish we were.
Well, so
discussions like the one we're having tonight and discussions that we've had in the past and will continue to have, all will inform an opportunity to do better in 2024. Yeah, you're right. I have a different, not completely, but slightly different philosophy about how to go about it. I believe that that's a good idea because I think that it's a better way to differentiate us early from the Republican and Democratic parties. I also believe that just per se trying something a little bit different is a good idea. For my money, I believe the number one thing that we need to do a better job of is not merely the timing of our media buys, but that our message has to be policy forward and completely differentiating us from the Republican and Democratic parties. And that to the extent to which we're talking about things that you might hear from a Republican or Democrat, we might be, I don't want to say completely wasting our time, but not getting all the traction that we could get.
But if we were to completely differentiate ourselves, aren't we missing out on all the Republican school choice people who should be voting for libertarians first?
Well, look, the point is not to seek common ground with Republican politicians, but with Republican voters, right? So yes, we need to be out there clearly making it known that we are pro-school choice, and we are even, homeschoolers, that we believe that the entirety of funds set aside for public school education need to be shared not only with private sector institutions, but with homeschool families. That's not going to differentiate us completely from Republicans, but will differentiate us a little bit. I do believe that the biggest way to differentiate ourselves from the other parties' politicians in 2024 will be an anti-war message, by the way. I don't believe that people are going to get that from Democrats or Republicans going forward. And I think a lot of Americans are ready to hear that. Would you agree with that, by the way? I'm interested in your feedback on
so
that.
it's interesting. I mean, obviously, if you think about who are your big anti-war allies who are currently in office, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Tlaib, Ilhar Oman, right? I mean, those are the guys who are really anti-war right now. Now,
maybe not the best batch to ally yourself with.
But so there are a lot of good people, certainly antiwar.com. I've liked those guys for a long time. But I will say that for me, my take on it and my take on the rally, because I think that's something we should talk about as well. I know that you did some talks in support of the rally.
I was a sponsor, yes.
Yeah, is that I'm a big fan of self-defense. I think that if somebody invades your house, you're allowed to defend your house with whatever force you can get. And you're allowed to ask people to help you. Now, do I wish that the government didn't have, what are we spending? $800 billion this year, 900 or $1 trillion next year on defense? Sure.
800,
yeah. I wish that we didn't have that buildup. But if my choice as to what it's going to be spent on is helping people to defend their homes or invading another country, I'd rather use it to help people to defend their homes. Because when there is an aggressor out there, right, what do I want to do voluntarily as a community? And look, taxes are not collected voluntarily. Everything that's owned by the government was taken from us by force. It is unethical. That's not going to change probably in our lifetime, maybe in Dave's. But not if he keeps eating that.
It's only like 5 years, man.
But in that situation, my feeling about it is that there's, to me, it's a clear-cut reality that if we and the rest of the world were to stop giving weapons that we already have to the Ukraine, Putin would win. And that makes the world much more unsafe, because then you're telling him, and I know that you have a background in international relations, I believe, right? You've done some serious stuff.
International economics.
Yeah. So,
and I've done a lot of traveling. You're right. You and I don't agree on this.
But economics is great because I'm betting that you're a Freakonomics example like I am. And people understand that a lot of people misunderstand. They think economics is about money. And economics is not about money. Economics is about incentive and what makes you want to do something. And if the answer to the Russians is they can invade anybody they want and there are no consequences, and we've actually seen this over time, do we make the world more or less safe by saying we will never confront them?
Well, you've said a lot there, not all of which do I completely disagree with. And of course, your fundamental conclusion at the end, I do agree that you're not helping the world by encouraging. You didn't say this. I'm only exaggerating.
That's fine, but I agree. Appeasement is encouraging.
Yeah, we're not helping the world by encouraging Russian violence, to use a word. Absolutely. Where I have a problem, and I'm interested in your reaction to this, I'm not suggesting you would necessarily disagree with this completely, but where I have a problem is the assertion that it's the United States' responsibility particularly. In other words, yes, let's say we wish that Russia didn't invade Ukraine, and let's say, given that they did, we wish they wouldn't win. Let's say all that is true, and we can actually argue that second half a little bit, I suppose, but I think you and I personally would at least agree that that's true so far.
I agree.
So, yeah. that doesn't necessarily imply that it's the United States' responsibility to do something about it.
Right.
And part of the reason, I'll just make
finish.
this real quick and then get your
Yep.
feedback on this. Part of the reason I say that is an ethical matter, and some of it is a practical matter. And by the ethical piece, I mean it can't be all on the citizens of the United States to do something about this. And that's not to say that it has no effect on people who live in Kansas City, right? I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that the impact on the people that live in Kansas City is probably not large enough to justify the amount of money we're asking them to spend to stop the Russians in their tracks once this has gotten started. In other words, you got to draw the line. Your point is you have to draw the line against the Russians somewhere. And my point is you got to draw the line against U.S. responsibility somewhere also.
Right.
So
I agree with that. And I think,
and then the other aspect is more of a practical one. And I'll shut up.
I want to be respectful and let you go.
The other piece is more of a practical one. And back to your idea that incentives matter as they do. I worry that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The more that we do, the more we're expected to do, and therefore the more that we budget, and therefore the more that we can do, and there's your cycle.
So,
and I think that for this reason, we'd be better off telling NATO, it's been great, but it's not in our interest anymore. If you remain fearful of Russia, I'm not suggesting you should or shouldn't, but parenthetically, if the Russian invasion of Ukraine has proved anything, it is that Russia wasn't quite as powerful in a conventional sense as we had thought, by the way, but set that parenthetical aside. To the extent to which you remain fearful of Russia, you guys, you European nations, this is your 18-month warning. It's time for you to start spending 2.5% to 3.5% of your GDP on defense if you believe that's warranted, but you need to make the decisions in your best interest without the expectations that the United States taxpayer is going to be your backup.
So, Mike, you talked about being a sponsor of the rally. What are your thoughts about? I mean, because there were so many people that were involved in the rally, like Jackson Hinkle and the Center for Political Innovation. People that were there,
not all of whom are our friends. Is your point?
Well, I mean, they were very pro-Russia. That the fault lies in the fact that we are against Russia, or that we're just that it's oppositional defiance towards the United States and whatever the United States does. Were you comfortable with that? Those folks being involved?
No.
Or were you, I mean,
no, comfortable? No. And you picked the right word, right? Because if you had said tolerant, yes. Comfortable, no. But I do believe that tolerant is probably the hurdle you have to clear for a single issue coalition for purposes of a rally. Remember that a rally, and I don't mean to sound like, you need to agree with me, right? But this is my view on it. That a rally is different than, for example, merging your parties to just exaggerate the matter, right? Yeah. That we're not talking about. We're not talking about a commitment to future events. We're not talking about a commitment to developing policy together. We're actually not talking about anything except holding this party together, this event together. And for that reason, I would say tolerance is the correct threshold.
But I think the danger in what we saw with this rally was that it wasn't really so much anti-war, that some of these folks were pro-war. It just that they want the Russians to win the war. Like that was what the I gathered.
It's an interesting thing, because at no point in time
I didn't see much of that. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but I got to be honest, I don't remember seeing much of that.
At no point in time, though, did anybody say during the rally the war could be over tomorrow if Russia withdrew back to their original borders. And nobody has gone to the Russian embassy and protested in front of it saying, hey, you guys invaded another country, right? The only people who are really being protested against of the two main combatants are the Ukrainians. Why is nobody Why are libertarians
Well,
not
I would
involved
say in
protesting
fairness,
Russia?
Dan, I would say yeah, I hear you. In to state it what I would view as slightly more fairly, I would say the protest is against the United States backing up the Ukrainians, not against the Ukrainians themselves. I think the vast majority of Americans, and I would even say the majority of libertarians, wish the Ukrainians well. I think what the protest is against not only a tremendous amount of money in terms of resources. And by the way, just as a point of fact, the United States acquisition is for things that we're producing now for the Ukrainian war. You're right. In the beginning, it was for stuff that was sitting out behind the barracks, leftovers. But that's not really the case anymore. We're producing equipment and munitions just for the war. So I think that there's an element of the resources involved, but there's also a fear, and I bet you would agree with me here, not that this will carry the day, but I suspect you'll agree with me that there is a risk that it gets out of hand. And I think that that's a real valid concern. Look, the President of the United States has been to Kiev. We've got something like 1,000
I just have to say,
people
we say
there.
Kyiv.
Thank you. And you're right, by the way. Kiev is an old school American.
Yeah, go
slightly
Volodymyr
incorrect
Novoruskizik, yeah.
Yeah. The president has been there. We are producing munitions in real time. We have 1,000 people there. Well, last report, I don't know what that number could be, smaller or larger today. They're not in per se combat roles, but we've lost a couple of lives, I understand. So it's starting to feel like a proxy war plus, as opposed to not quite a proxy war. It's starting to feel like the real deal. And when it starts to feel like that, it feels like the slope toward escalation is getting greasy. When you see the White House starting to have its own image tied up in the success of the Ukrainians, then I start to worry that if things go south for the Ukrainians, we will double down and then double down again. I think that that's a valid concern.
I definitely agree that escalation is a huge concern. And certainly we should learn from, the mistakes of previous interventions in terrible places. I mean, I think we would all say that, Vietnam was an enormous mistake, especially since when Ho Chi Minh was inaugurated, he said, "We hold that these truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal." Right? Ho Chi Minh was a huge Thomas Jefferson fan. Mike, the other guy, Dave. I see we have some good questions from.
We do.
Yeah, I saw that as well. And you're right. And just one more,
please.
Let me agree with you regarding Vietnam. It too was not fully envisioned as its final scale at inception.
Right.
No, I mean, we had advisors, and then the advisors started getting into
absolutely.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, there is the slippery slope argument, but
it felt a lot like Ukraine feels today. 1962 was not completely different than 2000.
Well, the one thing I'll say about it, though, is that it is different in terms of, right, the ethics of Vietnam. The South is clearly in the wrong. In the Ukraine, Russia is clearly in the wrong. Russia invaded the Ukraine.
That does make it different. I agree with you. Although the other thing that needs to be said, and we should probably drop the Vietnam analogy, because like all analogies, they eventually break down. In Vietnam, and I realize that Henry Kissinger is the only last living person that thinks that Vietnam was a good idea. But the argument at the time was that it would lead from one nation to another. And I think that argument is more difficult to make. I'm not saying it's impossible.
No, but
it's much more difficult to make about Ukraine.
But actually, I would argue with that, because I mean, I was lucky enough to know Pamela Harriman, Avril Harriman, the architect of.
That's very interesting. In Washington,
Martha's Vineyard. She had a summer house there.
You're lucky. I understand she was an interesting character.
Unbelievable parties. Like, you wouldn't believe the people who were there. And
I've been told. I'm so jealous.
I was lucky in that I was just a beach bum who would have parties. We would drive over in a boat from the mainland and have.
Now, is this after Averill, or did you meet him?
No, I never met him. So this is after him. This is mid 80s, mid early 80s.
So she was up there.
Oh
in
yeah,
years.
no, she was old. No question about it.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things that we were just the cool kids who were down on a beach, and somebody on a whim said, "Hey, invite those kids up to our party." I met.
I hate you.
I met Martha Stewart at one of those parties.
Nice.
I hate you less.
Okay. But I do think though that there is a thought that Russia has shown a history of over the last 10 years of invading former republics, and this is the latest. I think that Lithuania and Latvia.
Well, you're right about that. You are right about that. And that is an important counterpoint. I just don't see necessarily the link that Ukraine itself is going to lead to something else. But, you could have argued that even if South Vietnam, North Vietnam, even if you knew the direction that was going to wind up, it might still have been a difficult argument that Cambodia and Laos were actually threatened next as well. But we've beaten that metaphor sufficiently.
Let's go to some questions.
Yeah, well, before we get to some questions, and the last point I'll make on this whole thing is that if we had left Ukraine alone, there is a greater concern in that the Baltic nations are there ripe for the taking. That they're NATO. Those attacks would cause an escalation, a forced escalation. So if the Ukrainian attack hadn't been answered, I think that and Putin would have been emboldened to go after the Baltics. But
I appreciate that.
I want to say
I probably disagree a little bit, but
no.
I get your point.
I want to say too, Mike, we asked you some tough questions. You took them all, so
yeah. And I want you to talk.
Not bad. You guys asked the right question. You didn't ask any dumb questions.
Well,
wait. We have some ones coming up.
Yeah.
Not yet.
I did want you to talk about your Gold New Deal. So what is the Gold New Deal? Just
well, I appreciate that. The Gold New Deal is our platform. We gave it a name and its own URL because we wanted to convey a sense that we were committed to it, so that people didn't feel like we were likely to back down from it on the other side of the nomination. I hope that makes some sense. So if people want to read about it, they can go to goldnewdeal.org. It's a very transformational collection of libertarian ideas. For a lot of libertarians, it'll feel a little bit like bread and butter. But I do believe it's fairly forward. I believe that it'll cut a clean edge against Republicans and Democrats. It talks a lot about decentralization, including the flagship idea of giving states the authority for nullification and to opt out of federal supremacy. The idea is to make the 10th Amendment mean what I believe that the founders meant by it. Some folks have teased me. Feel free to jump on this bandwagon. In essence, Mike, why don't you just suggest passing the 10th Amendment over again and saying this time we mean it? And I'm sensitive to that argument. And maybe that's not a bad idea. I'm just not sure it would work.
All right.
But thanks for asking about it. Folks can go to goldnewdeal.org and read about it, or go to ter.com and link there.
Yeah, we got the link up there on the screen if you want to check it out.
Thanks. You're awfully nice.
We've got questions from the audience, so let me scroll back through some of this stuff. One question back on the public school stuff, my friend Imana said, I lost it. Where'd it go? Basically, it's can you what kind of guarantees can you give about public education if you get rid of public schools? Can you guarantee education for all?
Can you guarantee education for all? I think that's a two-part question. One is the extent to which you want to impose that at all. I believe the American public at a very small community level will remain comfortable imposing requirements for education for a lot of generations. Mm-hmm. However, we may feel as libertarians that families need to make even that most fundamental decision for themselves. And, however you feel about homeschooling, that is one way to opt out of the system completely. However we may feel about that, I believe that this decision must be made at the smallest community level possible. But I believe that the vast majority of communities, I hate to ever say every single tiny community, but I believe the vast majority will, for a long, long time, and maybe forever, continue to say that kids are going to be required to go to some form of education. So having said all that, yes, you can require kids to go to school, but still phase out of a public school system. You just need to, verify that you sent your kids somewhere, right? I'm not a big believer in, having the public sector impose some big regulatory apparatus, but it does today. States today require schools to do certain things to meet those requirements, right? I would loosen up on that. But
what about something like
in answer to your question, it's pretty straightforward in its management.
What about something like a Swedish model where it's, you get money and you can basically all the schools are private. You choose which school you want to send your child to.
I think that that's exactly where we need to end up. It can be done with a voucher system, which might make some people more comfortable. I'm good with money, right? Because it's the most efficient way to go. But I could imagine some people who feel like it's a risk to give people money because they'll pocket it and not send their kids to school. Those kind of people would be more comfortable with a voucher system, whereby which the voucher isn't worth much unless you go to school.
I agree with the voucher system. I'm going to give you one of my number one things to fix American schooling system for free. You're welcome to take it for your campaign. One of the things that is crushing American education is the teachers union right now. And one of the ways that we can fix that is I'm a former teacher. I was a teacher for 7 years.
There is no higher calling, Dan.
Well, I was a special education teacher too. I loved it. It appealed to me. I woke up every day. Yes.
Okay, I hate you less. I know I was mad at you for that Harriman party story.
So the problem is, though, if you ask anybody who's teaching or anybody who's worked in system, they know teachers who hate their job, but are teaching because they know there's a pension at the end of the road, at the end of 20 years.
Cops too. We're going to talk about that in a moment.
One of the things that we can do to fix that is replace teachers' pensions penny for penny with a 401k. Make it portable so they can go anywhere they want. So that if a teacher after 10 years decides, you know what, I hate teaching, they leave and they go somewhere else. Because right now, if a teacher stays in their job, it hurts three groups of people. It hurts the teacher because they're working a job they hate. It hurts the students because now they have a teacher who hates teaching. And it hurts the school district because they don't get to hire a young person who wants to come in and take that job. So,
and to your point, it hurts the teachers who don't realize that the portability would eventually lead to greater competition, for them.
Right.
If we would have schools competing for the best teachers compensation would be driven up. And to your point about the unions, one of the big problems with unions, and this applies to teachers and to police officers, and by the way, other public sector unions, they preclude competition on the basis of performance. They typically don't allow anything to take place on the basis of performance, much less firing, which is another whole ball of wax that we need to loosen up. But if the unions would allow such competition, what they don't realize is it would be good for the teachers themselves.
Yep, absolutely.
Police officers too.
So go ahead.
I got another question. This kind of goes to internal LP stuff. So are you a member of a caucus?
John Waldenberger points out that some states have moved in this direction. He is correct, and it is a good thing. And in those states where you can jump into your state pension, like in Florida, a lot of the agencies are in the state pension. That creates some portability, but not enough because not everyone participates in the state system. And by the way, not everyone wants to participate in the state system. So it's not a perfect solution, but John is right, and that's a good thing.
Janice says, do you belong to the Macy's caucus or any LP caucus?
I noticed that, and I wanted to get to that. Yes, Janice, I do. The answer is all of them. Well, only three that I know of. I just
Are you a member of the Classical Liberal Caucus?
Yes, I am. And I don't want to try to say something that would mislead you. I have been a member of the Mises Caucus the past couple of years. I've been an active participant with them. I've given them money and, a certain amount of blood, sweat, and tears. And I realize that you may have some viewers who don't appreciate that. There has been some contentiousness, and I don't want to put my head in the sand and pretend like that's not a thing and that doesn't exist. Having said that, while I do appreciate the support of the Mises Caucus, they helped sponsor my congressional run 2 years ago, for which I was very grateful. And I have appreciated the chance to work with them. And I share a lot of interests that are aligned with the reason the Mises Caucus came to being in the first place. Having said all that, yes, I'm a dues-paying member of the Radical Caucus and the Classical Liberal Caucus, and have found, and I will say this to my Mises Caucus friends, as well as my Classical Liberal Caucus friends and Radical Caucus friends, I have found that those conversations in those caucuses to be extremely thoughtful, insightful, educational, and good for me personally. So as much as that may be an unpopular view, maybe some of your viewers will love that view and some of them will hate that view, I will continue to hold it because it has been good for me personally. I was just in a conversation with the CLC people yesterday, and once again, it was nothing but educational for me.
Well, so then let's talk about some of the controversial things that the Mises Caucus has put forward. Number one, removing the bigotry clause from the platform. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I really appreciated Spike's suggestion there, and I think we all did, right?
I didn't. I thought it was terrible. Well, I thought it was appeasement. I thought it was 1939 all over again. Because if you
Dan, that might have been,
if you're going to draw a line in the sand,
I believe that's an exaggeration. I don't believe you really mean it's 1939.
If you're going to draw a line in the sand, let's draw it over saying we believe that bigotry is irrational and repugnant, and we believe that removing that line, saying we don't say that anymore, is a statement in and of itself.
Yeah,
I believe you, and I agree with that as a political matter. That as a political matter, when you make that move, people are going to notice, they're going to interpret something about your motivations, whether it's correct or not, they're going to interpret that, and that can lead to some really problematic politics. So yes, it is to use your word, statement. I agree that statement is interpreted by outsiders in a very meaningful way and therefore creates problematic politics. Having said that, I think that we need to appreciate the reason why people wanted that clause out of there.
They wanted small-minded bigots to feel welcome in the party.
Yeah,
I don't believe that that's true. No, I don't agree with that at all.
Completely. That's what it was. They didn't like the fact they wanted the people who feel that bigotry is your right to feel welcome in the party. And now, while we might agree that people have a right to be bigots, I don't think we want to say we want to welcome bigots into the party.
I agree. That last sentence, I agree with you wholeheartedly. That we agree that you and I would agree that the First Amendment has no meaning whatsoever if it's not to stand up for people's right to say stupid shit. Agreed. And believe me, if I accidentally say anything that makes you feel like I'm trying to suggest that you don't believe shame on me.
That's fine.
We're on the same page there. But I don't think that saying that implies that you're trying to give quarter to bigots. And I appreciate why the politics makes it look like that. But consider the following, if I might, and this may not win the day, but let me share it anyway. We don't say in our platform, we don't really list a lot of other things we don't like. I'm desperately trying to think of an example real quick. But there's lots of other things that we don't like that we don't call out explicitly in our platform.
I mean, torture, death penalty, involvement in foreign
those
wars.
things we do call out, right? Because they're existing public policy. They're existing public policy that we don't agree with, and we want those to change.
Which is the problem with bigotry. Right. The problem was it was public policy for a really long time.
And here's the thing that I have with the whole
Well, it is, but it's not now. I mean, public sector bigotry, we all agree should be illegal, right? We wouldn't tolerate a state entity, a public sector entity, doing something that discriminated among people to the extent to which we believe government should do anything. We can all argue whether government has any legitimate function whatsoever, but to the extent to which we tolerate government's existence, we would not tolerate it in a differentiated fashion toward different people. We all agree on that. But I don't think that necessarily implies that we need to go out of our way to sound like we're not First Amendment advocates. And I know you didn't say that. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I think that there's a concern, and I'm sensitive to this argument. I'm not trying to say it's other people's concern. I share this concern. There's a concern when you call out specific policy, right? And say, I know this doesn't need to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway.
But it doesn't need to be. It still needs to be said. I mean, if you think that you're not seeing bigotry in today's world, then
even from well, I'm
Yeah,
no
I
longer
mean,
listening, but from libertarian social media, we're
Yeah.
seeing bigotry espoused. Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. We've even seen some doozies from the Libertarian
Yes,
Party.
you do. Yes, you do.
And it's like,
and that's horribly problematic. But I believe that that's a different. If I say anything that suggests to you that I tolerate that shit, I mean,
Well-
shame on me. But that's a different issue, isn't it? And maybe I'm wrong, but I think that that's a different issue than there ought to be public policy.
we're not
against
talking
this.
about public policy. We're talking about the platform of the Libertarian Party.
But isn't the platform supposed to be all about public
No,
policy?
the platform is about what we believe.
statement of it, principles, statement of
I don't
beliefs.
think that's true.
I mean, that's not what our platform is. Our platform has never been about public policy. It's been about the things that we believe. I mean, we had an abortion plank, but we also have a sex worker plank. We have a freedom plank. We have a intellectual property plank. We're talking about the things that we believe. We're not talking about specific enactments of those things. We leave that up to individual people.
Well, true, but all those things all those things are driven by or touch public policy.
Sure.
I mean, let me exaggerate it. We don't have an NFL plank,
Right.
I mean,
You know what? We don't have an NFL plank, but we sort of do because we have a no subsidies for private businesses with taxpayer money plank.
There you go.
right?
So, I mean, that's what we're doing. There is,
But we don't want public policy against bigotry, except in the public sector.
so let me ask you this. Would you support reinstating that plank? The sentence, we find bigotry to be irrational and repugnant.
I find bigotry to be irrational and repugnant.
Would you support reinstating that plank?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think it's irrational and repugnant. I mean, I would rather tattoo it on my ass than or on my forehead. That might be going a bit too far. My wife might have something to say about that. I would rather have a tattoo that says that than accidentally imply I want it to be public policy, which I think is the accidental implication of it being in your libertarian political party platform.
Here's what
I think that's the point. Would you agree with that?
Here's
No.
where I'm going with the whole plank and everything like that is that, we've had our national and affiliates putting out.
Janice, by the way, says yes, definitely reinstate the plank. Just so you know.
But we've had messaging put out by the national party, by state affiliates that is bigotry, that embraces bigotry, and really when you pull that plank out and then you put out that kind of messaging by the national and the state affiliates, you're welcoming bigots. There really is no way to spin this other than you are welcoming bigots by one, removing the platform plank and saying that we condemn it, and then putting out the messaging that says, hey, Maryland put out a noose this weekend, and Libertarian Party of New Hampshire has put out race realist stuff before. and the National Party is put up.
I hear you. Let me propose another way to look at it. Would you agree that we would be better off if we didn't have this stupid messaging, which you and I dislike, and at the same time the plank had never been in there?
I disagree because I think so. Sadly,
Yeah, I'd rather make the statement.
Yeah.
I really would. I'd rather make the statement.
Sadly, there is a perception that libertarians want liberty so that they can be small-minded bigots. There's a perception that libertarians want to be libertarians so the government won't stop the Klan from burning down black people's houses. And we have to fight that perception.
It's just like we
do have to fight that perception. I agree with you. You and I are on 100% on the same page there. As a matter of fact, I go out of my way to make the following point. See if you appreciate this. Let me know if you think it's dumb. I think the 80s and the 90s, our party made a mistake of allowing ourselves to be identified as pro-marijuana instead of anti-prohibition. I think that we make a mistake when we allow ourselves to be seen as anti-vax instead of anti-vax mandate. I think that we make a mistake when we allow ourselves to accidentally be seen as bigots instead of pro 1A. You get where I'm going?
Right.
So,
but you know, we actually have an anti-vax mandate thing in the platform. Section 1.0.
Right.
Individuals own their bodies. Right.
Yes.
I mean, that's it. We covered that stuff.
Right. And we agree, just like we agree in the First Amendment. But to your point, I think that and I think you would agree with this, in the 80s and 90s, it was a strategic error for the party to be painted as pro-weed instead of anti-prohibition. It did not help our image. And to that same argument, it is killing us with many people outside the party to accidentally be seen as bigots because there are a handful of such people who call themselves libertarians.
Yeah, I disagree because I think we get still a lot of mileage out of being the party that refused to cave on legalizing drugs, not just cannabis, but cannabis came first, and also being the party that refused to cave on marriage equality. Now, look, is the system that we have in the United States ideal for libertarians? Of course not. We prefer that there's no government involved in recognizing unions that people want to have. But as long as the government is going to give a tax break to people who are married, we certainly believe that whoever wants to ought to be able to declare themselves married. That's a straightforward thing. And so but that's an example of another thing where we're sort of getting into the definition of bigotry, right? I mean, up until Obergefell, right? That was bigotry in place at the federal government. And, now that there's some talk about it being removed, I think it's important that we make a statement that we find bigotry to be irrational and repugnant because it doesn't make sense.
I mean, to me, it's just like the statement of
it's a true statement. Your point is certainly backed up by the fact that it's a true statement.
Well, I mean, look at the libertarian philosophy. Generally, we don't believe in the use of force to achieve political and social gains. We actually put that in writing and make libertarians, if you want to join the party, sign that statement of principle. So it's having that there as it's not necessary because the libertarian philosophy really deals with that. But as an outward advertisement to the government, essentially, we put that there so that they can't say that we're just an anti-government organization that wants to organize and overthrow the government. That's why it's there. So I think that's why we need to have that bigotry plank there, just to say, that's our line in the sand when it comes to, you can believe it. You can even be a libertarian and believe it, but we're not going after people specifically to fill our ranks with those type of people because it does us no good.
So
I agree. Just like I believe that we can't allow ourselves to be seen as anti-vax. We can't allow ourselves to be seen as bigots. We can't allow ourselves to be seen as merely pro-marijuana. We're anti-prohibition. We are anti-mandate, and we're pro-1A. So we agree totally. I think where I have a problem with it is when we say we hate bigotry in the context of public policy. If you want to say it outside of the context of public policy, then let's do that. Let's say that. I would support that.
All right. I think we should let you have the last word on that. And then
Yes.
I think that we are going to crush the news quiz with Mike on our team today.
Oh,
If Mike, you can stay.
Oh boy, don't count your chickens before those are hatched.
If you could stay on for 5 more minutes while we do the news quiz, we need your help.
Absolutely.
Because last week was terrible,
yeah, it
I
was.
believe.
Oh boy.
Oh, no, wait. Last week you guys kicked ass because I wasn't here. 2 weeks ago was terrible.
Oh.
No,
By the
it
way,
was-
John is right. And John Waldenberger just said bigotry is contrary to liberty. That is exactly right. And the way I say that is it is inconsistent with libertarianism. That's a very important statement. I think that we need to continue to say that and say it loudly. I just don't like saying it in the context of how we feel about the First Amendment, because you don't want to get that mixed
Yeah,
up.
I mean, for me, and I know I said I'd give you the last word, but I think 1.2 in the platform, we support full freedom of expression and oppose government censorship, regulation, or control of communication, media technology. I think we've defended the First Amendment all we need to. Mike ter Maat for president, and now Mike is going to help us win the news quiz. Dave, hook us up.
Well, actually,
right, let's hear it.
Mike, give us your sales pitch here. Like a quick 30
Oh my
second or
goodness.
minute.
Well, the sales pitch, we've probably been over it in some version, but the boiled down version is that we do have a huge opportunity in 2024. I do believe that my campaign is different from what we've seen in the past, inside or outside the party. And I believe that it is purposeful and important and necessary that we lead with a very policy forward campaign, that we do so with professionalism. I've already built a team. We've got 11 people that we're lightly paying on our team, on our staff. I do believe that having my own personal background in public service, both in terms of economics, teaching and practicing, as well as in police work, I think that's important to build credibility, because we are leading with a very transformational set of policies that needs to be backed up with real world solutions and credibility and expertise. And this is what's necessary to differentiate us from the other parties. Most Americans have a libertarian leaning. They will find us if we raise that flag loud and high and give them a chance to find us. And that's what our campaign is all about.
Awesome. MiketerMaat.com and goldnewdeal.org.
Thank
Yep.
you.
All right, let's do the quiz.
So let's hear the quiz.
Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at our context clues. We got peaches, Starbucks coffee, and smoke. Smoke them if you got them. So those are our context clues for the news quiz. 8 questions. This happened on Thursday, so stuff that's happened since Friday. Not quite on the quiz, probably in Thursday during the day. So I don't think the Donald Trump indictment is on here yet, but we'll see. All right, question number 1. Millions of people in the United States were under air quality alerts this week. What is causing a thick haze drifting over the Northeast, Midwest, and Mid-Atlantic?
Canadians.
Yes.
Illegal immigration.
No, Canadian trees.
Canadian heads flapping.
Illegal smoke immigration.
Illegal smoke immigration. That's my
right.
answer. Is that one of the answers? I can't read them.
Vehicle emissions, factory exhaust, coastal fog, or wildfire smoke.
No.
Wildfire smoke.
You should blow the quiz up full screen for us.
Dan, you probably have it slightly. You're just a little bit north and west of me. You probably have it a little bit worse than
It's
I
a
do.
little bit. I have a CO2 monitor in my house, and we're running around 1,200 right now, which is not terrible, but it's not great.
Yeah,
It was worse a few days ago.
Oh
right?
yeah, definitely. Thursday was the worst day.
Wednesday was the worst day for us.
Thursday
I'm in West
was
Virginia, so
right. Thursday, DC was the worst city in the world for pollution.
yeah, it was. And Friday they were like, well, they actually sent us air alerts because I work in DC for the federal government. I was supposed to go in on Friday, and they sent us air alerts like bad air alerts. Take precaution. Don't be exposed. And for most of the day, they were like, but you still got to come into DC for work and walk like 7 blocks from the metro station to the office. So, but we did finally get the day off, or not day off, but telework that day. So, All right. Question number 2. Residents in Washington, D.C. were startled by loud sound this week. What caused the boom heard throughout this capital city?
Oh, I know this
I
one.
know this one too. Thunderstorm, train crash, military jets, or fireworks.
No, as a matter of fact, I think it was a single jet.
Yeah. Well, they scrambled a couple jets, but yeah, the jet.
Well, so I might be wrong about the number. My daughter lives and works in Washington. She says she heard it.
Yeah. So the sonic boom.
We
They
thought
were
we did
authorized. They were authorized to use the sonic boom, which they're generally not when they're over American soil. Was used to try and because the pilot was slumped over. I guess they had depressurization of the cabin, and the everybody on board was either knocked out or already dead. But he was slumped over. They used the sonic boom to try and get their attention, but he never recovered, and the plane eventually crashed.
Wait, is
Yeah, well, the jet had to get to Washington in a hurry.
Yeah, from Andrews.
that true, Dave? I thought that it was the nature of how long they had to fly the intercept that they had to fly that fast.
I think it was a matter of they had to go supersonic
I
very
agree.
quickly, and whenever you go supersonic, you get that boom, and unless you manage it in a certain way.
But yeah, it wasn't just one boom. There were a few booms that
Okay.
happened.
Yeah.
So, authorized travel at supersonic speed. They raced to make contact with unresponsive aircraft in the region. Later, crashed into a heavily wooded area. Yep, sonic boom across the DC area.
I feel like those guys never saw the James Bond movie where they put the hook around the tail of the plane and then fly up in the air.
No,
All right.
and that's not going to work either. I mean, this happened several years ago. I remember Payne Stewart, the golfer.
Yeah.
I remember that too.
Yeah.
That was tragic.
So, a friend of mine, Marlene Ewing, if you're on, hey, Marlene, her company makes parachutes for airplanes, for Cessnas and things like that.
Yeah.
And essentially, there comes a point in time where if certain things happen, you start to an uncontrolled descent, it cuts the engine and it releases the parachute. Plane floats to ground, not as delicately as possible, but no crash.
Interesting. Yeah, that wow.
I know this one.
John asked, wasn't that Dark Knight? That might have been at least a slightly different circumstance. Or was John referring to the smoke in New York? John, are you in New York?
He's talking about.
He might be referring to having a Dark
No,
Knight because
he's talking about the
Canadians
Dark
use
Knight
smoke.
movie in which Batman captures an airplane with that method, I think. And no, I'm talking about it's the first Timothy Dalton Bond movie. The Coast Guard captures a drug running plane by they have one of those Bell jet helicopters, and it's a single engine Cessna, so they're able to overtake it and then hook it in. All right, I know this one. You don't have to show me. Oh wait, no, I don't know what it's called.
Apple recently unveiled its most ambitious and riskiest new product in years. What is it called? The Apple Car, the Apple Bike Pro, the
No,
Apple
it's
Pro,
the
or the Vision Pro. It's the Vision. It's the their competitor to Oculus.
Right,
the VR
it's Vision Pro, but I have to say it's a terrible name.
Well,
right, because it
Apple
sounds like
is not good at naming stuff.
It sounds like somebody's going to give you an eye exam. Hello, I'm your Vision Pro.
Well, maybe someday that you start.
Well, and it doesn't improve your vision.
No,
it gives you a different vision. I don't like the name either.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, have you guys ever done any VR stuff?
Yeah, I got an Oculus.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive where the tech is right now. And frankly, I expect Apple's to be an order of magnitude better because they're good at shit like that.
Oh, John Waldberger says cracked screens on day one. Wow. That does not surprise me. Yeah, that's. I'm not a big fan of Apple products.
I love my Mac laptop. I hate Apple as a company, and they stole some of my IP. So,
bastards.
John's asking for an Apple branded toilet. I'm not sure that's going to work out.
iToilet.
The
I want an eye in my toilet.
iCrapper.
iDump
is good.
Yes. Question number 4: Which country's outdated rail network was criticized this week? In wake of
India. Every few years, it breaks my heart.
Yeah, this one was brutal.
Well, and it's brutal in the fact that everyone uses the train system in India. So, I mean, these trains are packed full of people, sometimes on top of the trains. I mean, they're
it's really horrible. That's a really good point. Did you hear? I understand in France, I will probably get this wrong, so bail me out here. I understand the French government is saying that you cannot fly within the nation from one airport to another if there is a
Yes, that is correct.
train that can handle it in 2.5 hours or less. Did I get that close to
Yep,
being
they
right?
just passed that.
I'd rather go on a train anyway, so I don't get the blue gloves of freedom. But
One of the really interesting things about it, so we've talked about this before on the show, but I have 2 friends who work for 2 different companies that are making the automated truck. The automated truck is going to end human trucking jobs in the next 20 years. Just no question about it in their mind. But one of the things that they talk about is that the statistics are shocking. So more people die in trucking accidents caused by truckers than firearm deaths. And one of the things they say, in 30 years, people will look back on it and say, why did people take so long to introduce self-driving trucks? Because they could have saved, because self-driving trucks or trucker deaths are like 45,000, cause 45,000 accidents a year and fatalities. It's just one of those things. But trains they could do right now. And the reason why they don't is fucking unions. Okay, Massachusetts almost introduced automation for all the subways. And like anybody who's been to an airport has seen an automated subway system and knows it works just great. But fucking unions. I don't know who the train union is. Somebody chime in on that on the comments.
they're Teamsters.
Are they Teamsters?
Yeah, they're Teamsters because
Are they really?
when they have that,
Everybody's a Teamster these days. It's been consolidated.
I feel bad about the train union guys because they don't they almost struck for just to get days like sick days. Like that's not part of their union contract is having sick days. And they were about to strike, and then the Biden administration stepped in and said you can't strike, and you're going to deal with the contract that you're given and report to work, or you're going to get fired, like the air traffic controllers back in 1980. So just to get sick days, I felt bad for him, and I'm more of I'm okay with unions as long as it's voluntary. I think the Swedish model's fine when it comes to unions that
right. We're not talking about ending their First Amendment rights of association.
100%. 100%. I agree with you on that, Mike.
All right. Question number 5: while many U.S. industries have recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic, which major sector is still has a huge
Libertarian Party
shortfall of workers? That too. But manufacturing, construction, leisure and hospitality, or information. This one's going to be a tough one.
That is tough. I'm going to guess.
It has to be leisure and hospitality. Isn't that the one that got hammered the worst during COVID?
I agree with Mike, because information jobs are going away as AI steps up, and construction manufacturing should be good.
I really don't know. Don't take my word for it. I'm just going by logic, which usually doesn't
I
help.
agree. Leisure and hospitality.
I don't know what that means.
Just do it.
I think that means like hotels and amusement parks.
He's referring to the line. Somebody said, Dave, just moan like you love it.
Yeah. I don't know what that means.
You wouldn't fake it, Dan.
I would not.
So yeah, leisure and hospitality industry is struggling to recover all the way.
All right, we got it right.
The cigarette is down 349,000 or 2%. And that doesn't seem like a huge number, but for an industry that does rely on
well, it's interesting because it's seasonal as well.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like a ton, but 2%.
Let's skip question 6.
Which NFL team in history?
Are you an Eagles fan?
I'm not an Eagles fan, but I'm also not a Kansas City fan.
All right.
Nobody's a Kansas City fan.
Even people in Kansas City.
Don't click it. Don't click it. Okay. Oh crap.
Well, we got to get the question right.
Didn't the one thing I think that Trump did, or at least he said he was going to do, was not have sports teams come to the White House anymore.
Well, no, he did.
Well, Jill is making up for that by having the losers come.
Yeah, well, I will say Jill Biden's thing, that was
a little weird.
That was just terrible. And I'll call it out. I'd call that racism as well.
Yeah.
Well, of course it was. But it was the overarching theme was it was just goofy.
All right, question number 7. NASA will launch a spacecraft to an unexplored metal world this week, or this fall. I'm sorry. What is the mission called?
A waste of money.
Rockapalooza, right?
Project Stellar, Psyche mission.
If it's a
Operation
metal world, aren't they
Nova.
going to Ozfest?
Oh no, that's good.
Honestly,
That's good.
I mean,
You just come up with that?
Should be, yeah, I mean, it should be like a nice metal, death metal type thing, But none of these.
I heard about this and I still don't remember the
I have
answer.
no idea.
But I gotta say that NASA is. Oh, I like that. John says fake news Eagles one.
No.
I gotta say that NASA is a big fat waste of time, and that comes from someone who studied aeronautics in school and used to be a big NASA fan. NASA is a waste of money in so many ways. We probably shouldn't get into it. I'm just not a NASA fan. Don't click anything. As a matter of principle, don't click.
But we got to get the.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take a guess.
Let's yeah.
John says Nova.
I think it's got to be Odyssey Expedition.
No, that just.
I'm going with Psyche.
Psyche mission.
Yeah, because it's the dumbest one.
Psyche is the goddess of like romance or something. I don't know. All right,
it's the goddess of wasted money.
Let's go with Psyche if that's what Mike thinks.
All right, let's do it.
Oh, great!
Oh, you got it.
Mike, nice job! Nice job. That's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 8.
Oh,
we got a perfect score going so far.
Yeah.
Which this one is context clues.
Yeah, context clues here. Which fruit crop in Georgia has been severely impacted by the extreme winter weather?
What better be peaches? Is peaches one of them?
Strawberries, peaches, blueberries, or apples. And
peaches.
It is peaches.
Well, peach is the most logical, so maybe it's not
the
right.
The other one I would say might have been pecans, although I know in Georgia, I think they say pecan. No, South Carolina says pecan.
Pecan. It's pecan.
Yeah, they say pecans there. And I understand that strawberries and blueberries are awfully sensitive to not having the correct weather. So those could have been good answers.
But actually, apples is not that far-fetched. There are quite a bit of apple farms there in northern Georgia. But peaches, definitely based off the context clues. Question number 9, which automaker recalled 125,000 SUVs and trucks this week?
Oh, I heard about this. Toyota. This is the e-vehicles, or the hybrids. I'm sorry, the hybrids.
Yeah, Ford, Toyota, Mercedes, or BMW.
No, it was American.
So it's Ford.
It's I think it's got to be Ford. I heard about the hybrids have a problem with their engine.
Nice job.
Yep. Ford appears to be facing more manufacturing problems, not surprisingly.
Yeah.
I will say, people who are interested in the concept of home electrification, which I think is a really fascinating thing for us to be doing voluntarily, the Ford F-150 Lightning, in addition to all of its other things, fully charged, it can run your home for about 10 days as a source of electricity.
What?
Yeah, it's amazing.
All right.
What?
Yeah, it has. That's the capacity.
Is that
battery.
true?
Yep, it has.
Like I wouldn't need a generator. You're saying
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Unless you're,
wow, I wish you had told me this like a year
Well,
ago.
so
the truck gets swept out to sea from a hurricane.
I have, because I have a 3,300 watt propane generator, and it's awesome. But I also have.
Yeah, but that cost you a couple $1,000.
It did. It cost me like $1,500. And I mean, I had it because I used to live in Massachusetts, where you'd get a real winter and real snow. But we had those big ice storms last year. You probably got hit by them too, last January or January before.
Yeah.
And we lost power for 3 days. And in fact, we couldn't even get out to the main road. One day, my wife and I did 8 hours of hard road gang labor with the truck and 2 chainsaws to clear the road to get us out. So, but I was happy we had a wood stove and we had the generator. But when I saw what the F-150, that part of the F-150, and I've never been a fan of a full-size pickup truck. I think mid-size, I like the ability to navigate in between trees and stuff like that. But the F-150, if you're looking for something to back up your home's power supply, pretty amazing.
Yeah, I can't do full-size trucks. I got short Italian legs. So
Well-
like, it feels like I'm parachuting out of a vehicle
That
whenever
you won't like my
Dodge
To
Rams.
your point, I can prove that you're both correct. I have a full size Chevy. I backed it into a tree a couple
Oh, there
months
you go.
ago on my own property.
All right, question number 10.
Proving your point.
Question number 10. For a perfect week, Starbucks expanded its menu in several states this week to offer drinks made with which controversial ingredient?
Marijuana.
That'd be nice. Egg yolk, alcohol, protein powder, or olive oil.
I don't know, but I'm going to guess egg yolk because that would piss off the vegans.
Wait,
Yeah.
let's look at. I got to phone a friend. John, you got to pick one. You pick two now. John's going with oil. Olive
Why
oil.
would olive oil be controversial?
Janice says olive oil.
Uh-oh.
All right.
Janice got the Ford question right and the peaches question.
If the audience is saying oil, I think we got to go with the audience here.
Well, we got two oils. I think you got to go olive oil on this.
Unless Dr. Bolton.
Well, look, if you pick something
yes,
else and they said
yes.
olive oil, we're screwed.
Nice job, Janice. Nice
10.
job. Nice job.
10 out of 10.
Thank you. Popeye also olive
I
oil.
will
That's
give-
very funny, Ken. Popeye does like olive oil.
I'll give this episode a 10 out of 10.
Virgin Dave.
Oh, no, that's
Extra
funny.
virgin Dave. Yeah, no.
All right, we went way over our time.
We have.
I
Again,
No,
apologize.
that's not
Thank
your
you,
fault.
guys.
That's our fault. It was a good conversation.
yeah, I mean,
appreciate
that's the
coming
thing.
in
We had a
here
great conversation.
and answering every question, Mike.
Yep.
That was great.
Yeah, we appreciate
Well,
it.
I'm sorry that we probably teased a couple of those questions to death that didn't need it, but I really appreciate you guys letting me come on and chat with you guys. You're a lot of fun, and maybe we can do it
Hey,
again
you coming
next
to
year.
Freedom Fest?
Yes, I scored an opportunity to speak there, which I'm very excited about.
Outstanding.
What's
I
that?
said outstanding. I will see you there.
And I'm going to Pork Fest. I got to drive apparently around Philadelphia to
Yeah,
get there.
Either go through Scranton or take the Jersey Turnpike. But I recommend going through Scranton. If you look at it on a map, it's going to say it's going to take you 45 minutes longer, but you skip all the shit of 95 because you don't want to go
Yeah,
through
that's
Baltimore.
it's not a bad
Yeah.
thing. That's not a bad thing. And I'll be speaking at Pork Fest about criminal justice reform and about the new forms of financing and real estate and some of the new risks that we're going to be facing. So I'm excited about
Right.
that.
And you and Lars are both there, right?
I don't know that for certain.
I saw Angela put a thing out about that.
Okay.
The Jersey Turnpike isn't quite 95. I-95 goes through Philadelphia, and then
Now the Jersey Turnpike is nice, though. I used to live in New Jersey, and I used it all the time. I like the Jersey Turnpike.
Well, and that if you take Google Maps, it'll tell you to go up the Jersey Turnpike. Don't go through
Okay.
Philadelphia because I do the DC to Boston drive every 4 months. I still have friends.
John points out it is for parts of it is, John, and for parts of it isn't. Yeah.
All right, it was a good show tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everyone.
Guys,
for
thanks
joining
very
us.
much. I'm
Yep.
going to go to bed. I got a hugely busy week. Mike, I will see you at Freedom Fest.
All right.
I'll see you. Thanks,
And
guys. It's been great. Thank you very
Next
much.
week on the Political Deep Dive, we're doing a free-for-all on Sunday. So join us next
it-
week, Sunday at 10 p.m.
If anybody hasn't bought a ticket yet for Freedom Fest, or they want to go, use code LetLive50 to get $50 off your tickets.
Nice. Excellent. But yeah, so next week is free-for-all at 10 p.m. on Sunday. So join us then. And thank you, everyone, for watching us. And it is Father's Day. I'll have my cat here with me. So
I'll bring my
All right.
cat as well.
there we go. All right. Have a great night, everybody. Take
Good
care.
night, guys. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.